Hi there, I'm Savannah Mexto with Mannor Law Group, and I'm excited to welcome you to another webinar Wednesday with esteemed elder law and estate planning attorney, Robert Mannor. We plan to walk hand in hand through life with our partners, but life doesn't always go as planned. Sometimes one spouse must also assume the role of caregiver. You love your spouse as much as the day you traded vows, but this unexpected new role can cause much stress and sometimes grief. On today's webinar Wednesday, Attorney Bob Mannor will discuss the options that you have as a spousal caregiver and hopefully offer you some light in the storm. But before I pass the mic to Bob, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. First, even though Bob is an attorney, today's webinar will not give specific legal advice. If you have a question about your unique situation, I encourage you to contact us after the webinar. Also, if you have a general question during today's presentation, please use the question box. We will save time to review questions during the webinar. If for some reason we don't get to your question, we will contact you after the presentation. Lastly, note that today's presentation will be recorded and the replay will be sent out tomorrow so that you can share it with your family, friends, or anyone who you think could benefit from hearing this information. Now, why should you listen to what the folks at Mannor Law Group have to say? First, note that we're a nationally recognized and respected elder law and estate planning firm. All three of our attorneys are accredited by the Veterans Administration to assist veterans with claims and appeals. Attorney Bob Mannor is nationally board certified as an elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation. He's one of only 19 attorneys in Michigan to achieve this designation. Bob is also a leader among elder law attorneys in Michigan. He's currently chair-elect of the State Bar of Michigan Elder Law and Disability Rights Section and past president of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, Michigan chapter. Lastly, Mannor Law Group has been honored by readers of our local paper as the best or favorite law firm for the last 8 years in a row. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Attorney Bob Mannor.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today. As Savannah said, there's always a little bit of housekeeping to do here, and one of them that she mentioned was this quick disclaimer that specific advice or specific circumstances need specific advice. So just to reiterate what Savannah had already said, oops, I'm going to go back here. So this is a really important topic, and so today, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. If you've been on a webinar with me before, often what we're doing is I'm going through a slide presentation for you. But today we're going to actually just kind of have a conversation about this because this is a really important topic. And there'll be a couple of slides, but it's really something that we just want to have a discussion about. So one of the things that we often see in our office is a married couple where one spouse has a specific need, and the specific need being that they they need care, that they're going to need some form of care, whether it be from the standpoint of that they have some memory issues such as dementia or Alzheimer's or those types of things, or it's just the physical care. It's most common, to be honest with you, the most common scenario is that the one spouse that needs the kind of 24-hour supervision, the 24-hour care is they have memory issues, they have dementia, they have Alzheimer's, they have some form of an inability to make executive decisions on their own. But it is also the case that it's sometimes that there's just a physical need. And the physical need is that they're mentally fine, but they just can't get around. They can't get out of bed. They can't get to the bathroom on their own. They can't get dressed on their own, those types of things. So one of the most common scenarios that we look at here is where, a spouse, they've been married for a long time and they say, I've been taking care of my husband. I've been taking care of my wife for this many years. I'm just going to keep doing that. And that's great. There's nothing, wonderful. But there's some things that you want to think about. We don't want to put blinders on and just ignore some of the problems that are coming down the road. It's like, the train's coming, and we even know it. And it's what keeps us up at night, and we worry about it. And the thing is, if that train is coming towards us, we need to do something about it. We need to adjust. And even though it might be that we're still going to care for our spouse, we need to make sure we have some things in place. We can't just ignore what's happening. And so I'm going to talk about some of those things that people will often worry about, but not say out loud, right? So you've got a spouse, you've got a parent that needs a lot of help. They need a lot of care. They need a lot of supervision because of memory issues. And that there is often, it's hard to talk about. It is hard to talk about these things about, well, what if another bad thing happens? What if the next shoe drops? What if the dad gets worse? What if mom gets worse? What if, and here's where I'm going to start the conversation. What if the worst happens? So what do I mean by the worst thing happening? And this is a tough place to start. This is a tough conversation. And I'm going to be pretty blunt about it because it's so important of a conversation. And the question is, what if the healthy spouse dies? What if the caregiver spouse dies? Okay. Do we have a plan for that? And, you know, even from the standpoint of what if it was something emergent like a stroke or a heart attack, is the other spouse going to have the ability to respond to that, to notify the authorities, to, you know, to react appropriately? But then beyond that, it's not just about that day. It's about, okay, well, what happens with the money after that? What happens with the house after that? Who's going to be in charge of that? Who's going to control that? Is there any way to protect any of that? Where would dad or mom live? How are they going to get their care? These are things that we have to talk about, even if the other spouse is perfectly healthy. This is always very unfortunate, but we have some couples that are fairly young, in their 50s or 60s or 70s, and the one spouse is very healthy and the other spouse needs round-the-clock care. I can't tell you how many times the caregiver spouse died, even when they're in their 60s, even when they're in their 70s. There's a whole lot of stress. In fact, the statistics tell us it happens most of the time. Scary thought, but most of the time, meaning more than half of the time, it's the caregiver spouse that dies first. So if we know that's honestly likely to happen, meaning it's more likely than not to happen, we have to have a plan for that. Okay, and that's where a legal plan comes in. That's where having a family meeting comes in. That's where making a plan for moving forward and making sure that we have the legal permissions in place. We have a strategy of what would we do under these circumstances. We have a financial strategy and a legal strategy to protect the assets. That's so important. And it's just one of those things that I bet if you're facing this situation, I bet at 3 in the morning when you couldn't sleep, you thought about it. But a lot of times nobody ever says it out loud. Because it's a hard conversation to say, well, you know, I know you're perfect. Okay, that should be better. Let's turn that back on here. Okay, better. So bottom line is that's something that there's very specific legal planning that needs to be taken care of. And when I say very specific legal planning, that means it's different than the legal planning you currently have. So let me give you an example. So what does your current planning say? I bet you, I would be willing to bet that your current planning says, when I die, everything goes to my sweetheart, everything goes to my spouse, right? Or at least the majority of it does, or a big portion of it does. But in most cases, it's everything, right? Everything goes to the spouse upon my death. But if your spouse is the one with severe Alzheimer's, if the spouse is the one that can't get out of bed without 2 people assisting them, if the spouse is the one that can't go to the bank or manage the assets, that's not going to be a good plan. So the standard plan that most lawyers are going to do is not the right answer. And I've had lots of times where somebody went to a lawyer with this exact situation where we had one spouse who was not able to manage their affairs and one spouse that was, and yet they still set up the estate plan and the will or the trust or the legal documents exactly that way because that's the way they're used to doing it. And the idea is that's not going to be ideal. We want to make sure we have somebody that's going to be able to manage it, but there's also an opportunity to protect assets in that situation. So we don't want to have your standard will or your standard trust. And so if you've got a will or trust prior to this happening, prior to the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, prior to the diagnosis, or even if you got one afterwards and you didn't have an attorney that focuses his practice on this area of law, then we need to update it. We need to change that. So that's the most severe, that's the most important thing that we always like to talk about. But I want to talk about some more practical things. So let's shift gears a little bit and just kind of talk about it. You know, I've been working with families for 25 years now. And so the thing is, I've worked with so many families that are facing this type of situation. And I've learned a few things through the years. And so, you know, there's an advantage of age. There's an advantage of experience. And one of the things that I've learned is that there is a different way of communication. So a lot of times the reason why one spouse needs a caregiver is because of some kind of memory issue, is because of some type of Alzheimer's or dementia, or you know, just short-term memory loss. And the idea here is that it's the same person that you've been living with for 50 years or 20 years or 30 years or whatever. And it's really hard to make that adjustment, even in our conversations. So I will often hear folks, and whether it's a child or a spouse or whatever, and they'll tell me, you know, he's just being stubborn, or she's just being stubborn, and she asks the same questions all the time, or she knows better. Well, the thing is, you know, one of the things is when we need to kind of adjust our conversation style at that point, because when there is this memory loss, and you know, it can sometimes seem gradual, so it seems like it's the same person that we've always talked to, and you know, sometimes nagged them a little bit, or sometimes we said, you know, you know, he's just stubborn, or whatever the situation is. Now it's actually a medical issue, and the thing is, it can just make life so much worse if we argue about it. So one of the things that I find is somebody will ask about a dead relative, or they'll say they want to go home when they're already home, or they'll say they haven't eaten breakfast and they have eaten breakfast. So these things come up. What do you do? And the natural tendency, this is the spouse that you've had for 40 years. This is the person that you've argued with so many times about, yes, you had breakfast. Are you kidding me? You've had breakfast? Or you know your dad died 40 years ago. You know, those are normal ways to communicate in a situation like this. And the idea is that's not ideal, because you have to kind of adjust to the idea that the person, because of their medical condition, doesn't actually remember breakfast. They're not being just stubborn. They just honestly don't remember that their dad died 40 years ago, or that this is actually their house that they're in. And they say, I want to go home, and they're already home. And sometimes, you know, just on that one, this is a very common thing for folks to say they want to go home. And then they, you know, I've even had families that just assumed they think that, okay, well, that means mom wants to go back to her childhood home. And they, you know, there's been even situations where the childhood home was still in the family, and they would go to the childhood home and mom would say, I want to go home. In other words, there's no place that would meet that understanding in their brain of where home is. It doesn't, it's, you know, the brain is really interesting when it comes to this, because it's trying to figure things out. It can't remember this place. So it says, this isn't home, I want to go home, but it also isn't going to be able to process that childhood home. And so it's really interesting how the brain works, because it's always, even with somebody with severe dementia, they're always trying to come up with an answer. The brain's still trying to solve problems. That's what the brain does. The brain is designed to solve problems. That's what the brain does. It solves problems. It says, okay, here's a threat, here's an interest, here's something that, you know, to talk about, here's something to ask about, and it's trying to solve problems. And if it can't remember, it doesn't have the proper input, because it doesn't remember the surroundings. It might not even remember you, because they can't remember you as a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old. They might have remembered you as a 40-year-old, but they don't have any memory, all of those memories they can't access. Then, you know, what is the point of kind of arguing with them or trying to correct them? Because you're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. The most difficult, I find, is when it's somebody, they're asking about their mom or their dad, and they say, well, when is my mom coming by? Or when is my sister coming by? I haven't seen her in so long. And then people try to explain to them, no, sweetheart, mom died, or your dad died many years ago, decades ago, or your sister died, last year or whatever. And my point on that is, if your spouse, if your parent, whatever, doesn't remember that, why make them go through that grief all over again? So if you're trying to help them by saying, remember, your sister died last year, they didn't remember that. And now they're having to go through that grief all over again, because now you're saying their sister died, or their dad died, or their dad who would be 120 by now, or whatever, and you're trying to be rational, but that's not how their brain is working right now. And so you're making them go through that grief again, and then 20 minutes later they might ask the same question, and then you try to remind them again, and now they're going through that grief again. And the idea here, so here's the answer. Here's what all of the experts have told me, and in my personal experience has been the correct answer, is not to argue with them or try to correct them. It is basically to change the subject. And you don't have to lie to somebody and say, oh, so one of the things that we've sometimes done, for example, there was someone that was asking about their mom, and then asking about their sister, both of who had passed away. And so the response, which I thought was a very nice and gentle response, was when they would ask about mom, they would say, oh, she's with your sister. Or when they ask about sister, oh, she's with mom. Because the idea is they both passed on, gone to the next life, so to speak. And it was something that is, truthful. We're trying to say, well, they've moved on, but not having to have them experience that grief all over again. And so same thing, whether it's that, or whether it's about whether you've had breakfast or not, or any of those things where they just can't remember, they can't process it. The idea would be to just kind of change the subject and say, oh, that's interesting. Well, what do you think of that flower over there? Or, how do you, whatever, just kind of move on to the next subject. It's really, I know that's something that we used to do with children, right? It's one of the ways when a young child is really getting upset about something, you can scold them, or you can do those types of things, but it only makes it worse typically. If they're yelling and now you're yelling at them for yelling, it usually just makes it a lot more yelling. This is with a child, right? And so a lot of parents have figured that out and say, okay, well, we're just gonna, if it's a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, whatever, we're gonna move them off of that. We're gonna distract them with a toy. We're gonna distract them by asking them about what happened at preschool today, or whatever else, and move on from that thing. And so it's actually the same technique that we did with our children when our children were really little. And it seems, I'm not trying to be condescending, because we got to be respectful and all that, but it really is the right way to go, is to try to change the conversation to something that's going to not be an argument, and not trying to correct them or make them remember, because they're just going to ask the same question over again in a few minutes. And so it's just kind of to move on from that. So those are a couple of things as far as the adjustment. One of the best things, and I'm going to kind of shift gears here again and talk about that when you're the caregiver spouse, one of the most important things is that we get you some support, okay? And so many times I have this issue with a married couple, and especially, well, regardless, whether it's a man or a woman that's taking care of their husband or wife, they frequently will just say, I'm okay, we'll take care of things. This is a family matter, we're just gonna take care of things. Yes, it's possible that, I'm just gonna take care of things, okay? So and they don't ask for help, they don't accept help, and here's the key. It goes right back to the beginning conversation about caregiver spouses die first. Why do you think that is? Sometimes it's just because of the stress. Sometimes it's just because they're not getting sleep at night. Sometimes it's because they're not accepting help. And I always say, at that stage in life, we probably should accept help or ask for help before we think we need it. Before we think we need it. Because a lot of people will come into me, the parents will come into me, they have a spouse that has an illness, whether it's a physical illness or a dementia, type of thing, and they'll come into me and they'll say, we're just here to talk about what I'm worried about for the future. At some point, I'm going to need some help. Or at some point, I don't know what we're going to do here. Or at some point, what happens if I die? Or, those types of things. And my point on that is, if you're already worried about that, that's the point we should probably be starting to make some arrangements for getting you some assistance, getting you some relief, getting you a chance to leave and go shopping or go and sit on a park bench for an hour and just not have that, I had a gentleman that I was working with, and he lived on like 20 acres. And when he would get the help, he would just go out and sit in the woods. And he said it was the best thing he could ever do. I had other folks that they wanted to go golfing, and they hadn't been able to golf because they had to be with their spouse all the time. And so they were able to go golfing for a few hours. Just go sit in the woods, go golfing, go shopping, go visit friends, something that you just can separate and just recharge, take a break. But then the other things are just, if your spouse is at that level that they need assistance, you're doing the job of 3 shifts of people. If we did move into like an assisted living or something like that, then it's going to be 3 shifts of people helping that person, your spouse, and you're doing all of those jobs of a whole team of people, and you're doing everything. And maybe you get a little help from family, but they probably have jobs and kids and dogs, and they can't be there all the time. So maybe they come by for an hour a day, or maybe they come by every other day, or things like that. But you're doing the heavy, 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 heavy lifting. And the idea is, let's just get some help, whether it be to make arrangements to pay a family member to come by, whether it be a grandchild or a child or a son-in-law or anything like that. If we do that, there has to be a legal document. I hate to tell you this because people say, well, why would I need a legal document to pay a family member? That just seems ridiculous. And the answer is because the state requires it. If we ever need Medicaid later, if we ever need veterans benefits, things like that, we're going to need a legal document just documenting that we're paying that family member. That's something that we can do for you, okay? I don't like the fact that we need a legal document to deal with a family member, but you really do, and we can get into real big trouble if we don't have that. So get some help from a family member. Let's go ahead and pay them. If they're going to have to miss work or work less hours or just give up an opportunity, yeah, let's see what we can do about that. There might be government benefits that we could get to help pay for that. So veterans benefits or Medicaid benefits that we can get in the home that could pay for some help at home. There's some respite services where you could actually get respite for a week or for several hours a week, or sometimes even a week at a time. You want to go to a family wedding in Florida, you might be able to get respite for a week for your spouse, and you can go to the family wedding in Florida. And that's a hospice benefit, actually. And so there's lots of different government services that we can look at to get some help. And sometimes it's just writing a check. And I know, lots of folks, they don't want to spend money. They work really hard for their money. They don't want to spend it. But it's so much better if we have to, to just get some help to not drive yourself to the grave, kind of a thing, with all the work and hard work and heavy lifting that you're doing. And so sometimes we just have to bring in, a company to help us out. And I know people get a little weirded out by that because it's like, oh, well, we're bringing in a stranger into our house. I don't like this. It will be uncomfortable for that first day. It might even be uncomfortable for the first 2 weeks, right? But if we can get a good person and a good company, that person might end up becoming, there's so many folks that have done this, and then they just consider that person, the people that came in and helped, close personal friends, or just really good acquaintances, and sometimes they even name them in the obituary and things like that. And so and if we don't have somebody that fits, that's a good fit, let's get somebody else. Let's get a different company if the first company is not doing a good job. And so it's really, there's just so many times, and I'll tell you, people would need me less. They still need me because we need to put their legal documents in place for the emergency, but they would need me less in a crisis. We can prevent a lot of the crises if they would just ask for help before they think they need it, before they think that there's absolutely no other option other than to ask for help. Because usually before that happens, something will happen. Somebody will fall. Somebody will break their hip. The caregiver will get sick. The dementia spouse will take a turn, and that's when they call me. You know, they call me in the actual crisis. Now, what are we going to do? What are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do a week from now? I do that every day. I have those conversations every day with families, and it won't bother me if we stop having those conversations because people get more prepared for that we avoid the crisis altogether because we get help in the home before we need it. We're not having to balance our laundry baskets down that stairway to the basement. We're not, standing on the chair to lift, to reach the plate on the highest shelf. We have somebody that'll help us do that, all right? That'll do our laundry for us, that'll do our cleaning for us, that will help pick up dad if dad falls down, right? Those are the types of things that if you keep doing those yourself and you're balancing laundry baskets to go down to the basement or come up from the basement and you fall on the stairs and you're the healthy one, now we're in a crisis. We're in this big crisis, and then your kids are going to come to me and they're saying, Bob, what are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do in a week? How do we solve this problem? And I can help with that, but I'd rather have you not face that crisis. I'd rather not have that where it came to this, we have to do something, we can't do this anymore. Let's get help before we need it, okay? So that's one of the adjustments that it's really hard, I get it. You've been self-sufficient, especially they talk about the World War II generation, and even sort of the people slightly younger than the World War II generation as the greatest generation. Well, what did they mean by that? They are self-sufficient. My dad, up until a few years ago, was changing his own oil, and he would make fun of me that I would get my oil changed in an oil change place. He's like, "Why do you need somebody else to change your oil? You can change your oil." I was like, "Yeah, I can, Dad, but for $12, I can have somebody else do it for me." And he was self-sufficient. He built his own, most of his own house, and he did his own plumbing, and he did his own car repairs, and that's that generation. And it's so hard is it then to say, oh, I'm at a stage in life that I need to ask for help, or I need to not even ask, but accept help. And that really is a tough thing to do, but it's so important. And if you want to avoid that crisis, if you want to avoid your kids coming into me and going like this and saying, Bob, help us, we don't know what to do here because we've had this crisis. We had dad fell down the stairs, so mom broke her hip. Now, both of them are needing care, and we don't have a plan here. Let's plan ahead. Let's accept help before we need it. Okay, those are so important. All right, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here, and I actually am going to share my screen again with you because I want to talk about a few things that I think these graphs are helpful in. So hopefully you can see my screen now. What we have here, this is something that was shared with me by a gerontologist. A gerontologist is a specialized doctor that works primarily with folks that have dementia or Alzheimer's or some form of something, and memory issues. And I found this fascinating, and I really think this is helpful from the standpoint of thinking about the future and kind of managing our expectations for the future. And so he showed me that the different types of dementia, first of all, I'll make a plug for going to a gerontologist. So normally, if there's a sign of dementia, your family physician, your family doctor will send you to a neurologist. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Don't have anything against neurologists, but the end result of going to the neurologist is to diagnose, and most of the time, the answer is a prescription. So it's drugs, right? So you go to the neurologist, they do some tests, and then they give you drugs. A gerontologist is much more holistic. So even if you've gone to and I'm not saying don't go to the neurologist. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying in addition to that, or sometimes in place of that, but at least in addition to that, I make a plug for going to a gerontologist. So a gerontologist is much more holistic in their thinking about your situation. And sometimes it's simply a matter of helping you adapt to your current circumstances or looking at all of your medications. So many times I've had people go to the gerontologist and then next thing we know, they're taking half the medications. You know, some older folks, they're taking 15 different drugs. And when they go to the gerontologist says, well, you know, these 3 drugs you're taking because of the side effects of those 4 drugs. And so you know, you're taking a water pill and then you're taking a pill for incontinence. And so it's, you know, the idea is a gerontologist often is stepping back. They're not just looking at the brain, they're looking at the whole picture. Ideally, if they're a good one, right? If they're a good one, they're looking at the big picture and they're making suggestions about how to make your life better, looking at all the prescriptions, and sometimes just kind of giving you a forecast of what to expect next. Okay, and again, they might adjust your prescriptions or things like that. But so I had a gerontologist that helped me with this, and so he showed me this a graph, and he just kind of did it in pencil on a piece of paper. And so it was where we're looking at functioning, you know, how well the person functions over time. And he said with Alzheimer's that it tends to be sort of this gradual decline, right? And the idea is that, well, we don't know how fast that decline is going to be. It tends to be gradual. In other words, typically Alzheimer's doesn't present overnight, right? It doesn't be where we wake up one day and there's a dramatic, drastic change in the person's ability to function, functionality. It tends to be a gradual. Now, the bad news is that it keeps getting worse, right? It keeps getting worse. And so that's one of the things we can know. If we think it's Alzheimer's, then we know it's not going to get any better. We also know that it's probably going to be a gradual decline, okay? And it might be a quick gradual decline, but it's not going to be overnight. Typically with Alzheimer's, I mean, overnight, there's a dramatic change. It might be over a month, might be over a year, might be over several years, but it's not typically a wake up one morning. So then we have this other one we call vascular, okay? So vascular dementia tends to be where there's a decline, there's kind of a slow decline, just like Alzheimer's, and sometimes people think it's Alzheimer's, and then drop off the cliff, okay? And it just dramatically gets worse overnight. And then slow decline, slow decline, slow decline, and then another cliff. And the reason why this is helpful to know is because we need to prepare for that. We need to prepare for that on any given day. We might fall off another cliff. We might have a significant decline in function in a very quick, you know, scenario. And so when we're planning for this, that's got to be part of our way to think about this and create a plan, and even a legal plan and financial plan to say, okay, you know, we're doing okay now right here, but we got to look for that next shoe to drop, and we have to plan if there's a dramatic shift overnight, okay? One of the things I really like people to know, and a lot of people already know this, is the UTI. Okay, so we have somebody that has a little bit of dementia, maybe just, you know, old age, but memory loss, whatever, but maybe a little bit of dementia, they're declining a little bit. And then overnight, if they're just not even, you just can't even, it's, I remember my grandfather, who he's been gone many years now, but he was always a storyteller. So when you, I probably get that from him. I tell lots of stories to explain my examples and things like that, but he was a storyteller. He told lots of stories, and I always loved to just kind of sit and listen to him tell the stories. And then, you know, he had some medical issues, and then one day he didn't recognize anybody. He was lethargic. He was, I mean, he wasn't telling any stories. He could barely communicate, and it happened like overnight. Oh my goodness, what's going on here? And we've seen this now that I'm in this field of practice. I see this all the time. We get this call from clients all the time. And one of the things I push, I say, just make sure, and the doctors know this too. I'm not telling you anything that most of the doctors don't know, but the idea is check for a UTI, treat that UTI, meaning a urinary tract infection, so you treat it with antibiotics, right? And sometimes they're really nasty UTIs that the regular antibiotics aren't going to be enough, and sometimes they got to go to the hospital and get like, the powerful antibiotics, and you have to have double course or triple course or whatever. But it's really important that we get rid of that UTI, because often if we have that way more dramatic than the vascular decline, that they could actually come back up. Okay, that's one of those things that when there's a UTI, they might not. That's one of the, but most of the time you treat the UTI, person starts to get back closer to normal, closer to what they were before that. Now, that doesn't mean they're not still going to decline, and they're not still going to, follow one of these other courses. But when somebody calls me and said, it was just dramatic day and night between the 14th and the 15th, then it's probably a medical issue. It's probably, not just a dementia coming on. And then there's other types of dementia. There's one called Lewy body and Parkinson's, which can kind of be all over the board here. Okay, so that's a different one. It's kind of hard to put on the chart here, but I just thought this is really helpful from the standpoint of understanding some of these issues, because this helps us plan a little bit. We know we have to have a plan for some dramatic change if it's vascular. We also know that if it's a UTI and it's that dramatic of a change, that maybe this is just a short-term thing. Maybe this is, so I have people that come in, they're all ready to have dad in a nursing home for the rest of his life. And I say, hey, hold on, let's take a step back here. Let's just see what happens after they, treat the UTI. And most times we don't have to have that dramatic of a change. We can maybe, adjust and make sure we have a plan in place. But if we can recover from that UTI, so lots of times people say, there's a crisis, we got to call Bob. Good choice. Good answer. Crisis, call me. But the thing on it is, if it's just sometimes that crisis can be resolved. Sometimes it doesn't mean that this is going to be this person's mental state or memory issue for the rest of their life, especially if it's a UTI or other body infection. We treat that infection. We don't have to have a complete upheaval where they can no longer live at home, or they got to go to a nursing home. So that's one of the things that, absolutely, if it's a crisis, call us. But sometimes I'm going to say, hey, let's pause. Let's pause for a second. Let's see how the treatment goes. If they don't get better, then yes, we got to look at how we're going to get 24-hour care or whatever. But sometimes we have to just pause and say, hold on, let's wait. Let's see how the treatment goes. They might get significantly better. Then we got to get a plan in place for this doesn't happen again. So just because they get better doesn't mean you don't need me. It's just not quite the crisis that we thought it was. It's not so dramatic that we're going to have to say, okay, tomorrow we're going to a nursing home, right? So those are all things that we have to think about. All right. This is just something most people don't have. We call them in our office extraordinary powers. If you have worked with us, you probably have these. This is what we need with somebody with dementia. So before they get too far along on their dementia, we need to have them authorize their spouse, their kids, whoever it is that they love and trust, to have extra authority that's not typically in your standard will or trust or powers of attorney. So and why? Because we need to be able to help them. If they're not able to make decisions for themselves, we need to be, and a standard power of attorney isn't going to do it. A standard trust isn't going to do it. We need to have the authority to be able to protect assets, to qualify for Medicaid, to qualify for veterans benefits. So in our office, we call that extraordinary powers, and typically they are not in most documents that are drafted by attorneys that don't do this type of work. They might be estate planning attorneys. They might be the best estate planning attorney in the world, and they could very likely not still have these extraordinary powers because they don't deal with Medicaid. They don't deal with veterans benefits. They don't deal with nursing homes. They don't deal with this stage in life. And so that's often something that we're going to want to add. Okay, and I mentioned what if the caregiver spouse dies first. I'm not going to go through all the things that we can do for you, but I figured I would just show you this graphic real quick because it is dramatic what we can do here. And that is when we do have those extraordinary powers and one spouse needs to go to a nursing home or one spouse needs care in their house and we can get Medicaid for that, we can activate safe harbors to protect the healthy spouse, to protect the non-nursing home spouse or the non-Medicaid spouse. And most of the time, we can protect 100% of the assets in favor of the healthy spouse. Now, that's not the norm. If you go to any hospital, you go to any nurse, you go to any social worker, and you say, hey, we might need Medicaid, they're going to say, oh, you're going to spend down all your assets, you're going to lose everything. And that is the norm. That's the default. What I'm saying is, we're under the law, if you know how to use the law properly and correctly to benefit yourself, we can typically protect 100% in favor of the healthy spouse, as long as we have a healthy spouse, all right? So that's really important to know. That's really important to understand. And I point that out. There's a lot of other things we can do too. This is not just about Medicaid. This is not just about this. But my point on it is, it's the opposite of what everybody else tells you. So I compare it to, you know, we hear about rich people that don't pay very much in taxes, right? They're probably paying lawyers and accountants to make sure they don't pay very much in taxes. Well, I don't do that as it relates to taxes. I do it as it relates to Medicaid and veterans benefits, sometimes Medicare and sometimes other benefits. And the idea is the law allows you to do this. That's why, you know, Warren Buffett and all these other people, you know, say, hey, I don't pay very much taxes. It's because the law allows them to do that. They've got good lawyers and good accountants that help them figure out how to pay less. And, you know, most average folks don't need that because we don't make billions of dollars, but we do need it when it comes to these types of things, right? We do need it if we ever have to be thinking about Medicaid or veterans benefits or those types of things, or other government benefits to pay for care. So just be aware of that, that is a possibility here. All right, so we're gonna look at any questions, and then Savannah's gonna come on and talk to you about what to do next. You know, if you are facing this and you want to talk about planning for the future, you want to talk about avoiding a crisis, or if you're in an existing crisis, so you have a loved one that needs care, or we're pretty sure they're going to need care soon, it's important. The sooner we get involved, the sooner that we put a plan together, the better. Whether it's a crisis or not a crisis, it's best to get us involved. And so Savannah's going to talk to you about what's the best way to do that. And so Savannah, if you want to kind of weigh in on that.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. As Bob mentioned, we do have a couple of easy ways for you to get in touch with our team. Maybe you'd like to make an appointment, or maybe you just have some questions. Either way, we're here to help. So I have just put a couple of bits of information in the chat. First, I put our phone number. If you just want to give us a call, you can do that anytime. Our phone number is 810-694-9000. We're here from 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday, and we're more than happy to answer your questions. Now, I've also put in a link in the chat. This link, when you click it, it will take you to a calendar, and you can choose a day and a time when a member of our team can call you. So we'll call you at your convenience. Again, if you want to schedule an appointment, great. If you just have some questions about our firm, then that's great too, and that's what we're here for. So we can discuss your concerns, what it is you're looking for, and then we can also answer your questions about our firm. So more than happy to help. Again, the phone number is 810-694-9000, and I have put that link in the chat as well. You should be getting an email any minute. Maybe you've already gotten it, where you'll also have that link there as well. And remember that I'll be sending the replay to today's presentation tomorrow. Thanks again for joining, and we will see you next week.